Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about understanding a sentence. This is the most fundamental to the verbal section as a whole, because whether it be sentence correction, critical reasoning, or reading comprehension, the first step of it all is going to be understanding the data given to you. It could be a sentence, it could be a paragraph, or it could be an entire comprehension. But this forms the basis of it all. And we don't just want to be generically good at it. We have to be able to specifically know how every word contributes to the meaning of a sentence, or even the grammatical structure in case of sentence correction. And that is what we're going to start with today. There's a bunch of concepts, but we'll start with the most foundational of those, which includes subject-verb agreement, which is SVO, which essentially talks about the subject, the verb, and the object. Then we have modifiers, which are additional information. Parallel construction, I'm sure if you're preparing for GMAT you would have heard of this. This is the favorite concept of sentence correction. And pronouns, again, we would have heard of these. These four together create what is the skeleton of a sentence, the most important elements of a sentence. Everything else is in a way built around this. Every concept even is in a way built around these. So let's see how subject-verb agreement, modifiers, parallel construction, and pronouns create the skeleton of a sentence. Let's see. Any sentence that we are reading, whether it be for GMAT, whether it be in a book, has to have two important elements. It has to have a subject, it has to have a verb. There are some exceptions to it, but we won't confuse ourselves with those yet. Those are so few in number that we would most likely never see a question based on that. So these are the two most important elements, right? A subject and a verb. And even among these two, the verb is more important, because this is the action that is being talked about. In language, in English, there has to be an action, and the sentence has to be formed around that. So when I'm reading a sentence, I want to focus on that core action. I want to find out which action is the sentence talking about. I want to find out my verb. Once I can find this, all I need to ask myself is, who is doing this action? Who is learning? And in this sentence, it's pretty easy to understand. Only Harry could be learning, right? Magic won't be learning anything. It's inanimate. It's a non-living entity. So I can find my subject now, because the doer of the action is called the subject. I focus on the action first, then I find out who does the action, I find my subject. Once I have these two, a very important element again that might not be present in many sentences, but is usually present, is called the object, which is the entity upon which the action is done. So Harry is learning here, we know that, but what is he learning? Magic. And that's the order of importance, right? Verb, most important. Subject, about as important, but if anything, second most important. And the object, third most important. This is going to be the skeleton of any sentence I read, right? If I can find this, I have the skeleton. I have the core of the sentence. Then I work around it. So for example, none of the sentences that we read are Harry learns magic, right? None of the sentences we read are 3 words. Most sentences we read have many other words, are much longer. Something like this, for example, the last sentence we have here. So how do we make our way from here to here? In steps is the key. So after I have my core sentence, I might want to add more information about one of the entities. Now, to the core of the sentence, I might want to add a description about Harry. I might want to give more information about my subject, and so I add a young boy, which would be a modifier. Just gives me additional information about either the subject or the verb or the object. In this case, it is the subject, right? Similarly, I might want to add more information about the object, and I would say at Hogwarts. Where does he learn magic? At Hogwarts. This is not the subject, this is not the verb, this is not the object. It's just additional information that qualifies the sentence, that makes the sentence a bit more informative, better. And these are called modifiers. Also called jargon, because in most cases, this would not matter to the crux of my sentence, right? I have to be able to separate these two things, the subject, verb, object, and the modifiers. That is the foundation upon which all of sentence correction would be built. Similarly, I could keep adding information here. Harry, a young boy, learns magic at Hogwarts, and then I add more information about Hogwarts here. Hogwarts is a school for witches and wizards. That's another modifier. So now I have 3, and notice how this time I'm describing something that has come within a modifier. Meaning, I don't just have to bring additional information about subject, verb, object. I can bring in more information about a modifier as well. And then I can bring in more information about wizards as well. And I can continue that cycle for as long as I want. I can write a one sentence essay just by adding modifiers, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are different structures that can be used. Okay. The key here is not to know how many modifiers there can be. The key here is to identify the subject, the verb, and the object. If you can do that, the rest are naturally going to be modifiers. All right. Now we can further elongate that with the last sentence. Harry, a young boy, learns magic at Hogwarts, a school for witches and wizards that is governed by Albus Dumbledore. The crux still remains the same. I want to spot the verb, which will lead me to the subject, and that will lead me to the object. The rest all are just modifiers. And I just want to know what each of these modifiers points to. This points to Harry, this points to where he learns magic, this points to Hogwarts, and this also points to Hogwarts, or in a school, however you want to look at it. But they're all modifiers. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Build this first. Pick up a book, pick up an article, and just start doing this. Because many a times when you understand a sentence wrong, which I'm sure happens to all of us all the time, it's because we're not separating what is important and unimportant. This is how you spot keywords. The subject, verb, and object, they are the keywords here. The modifiers are how we qualify. Sometimes they would become the most important, but we need to keep identifying them. So practice this till you master it, and only then move on to solving questions. Now there's one more concept that we want to talk about, which is parallel construction. Now, how does parallel construction work, or what is the purpose of parallel construction, right? So we know that when we want to bring in more information about, let's say, the subject or the verb or the object or even any other part of a sentence, if we just want to bring in more information about that, additional information about that, we bring in modifiers. But what if there's more than one subject? Because it's not necessary that only one person or one entity does an action, right? Sometimes multiple entities do an action. Like, Harry's not the only one who learns magic. Hermione also learns magic. So if I want to bring in more than one subject, more than one verb, more than one object, more than one modifier, more than one of anything, I bring in parallel construction. That's the purpose of PC. So now I have two ways to elongate a sentence, right? One, I can add modifiers, and one, I can add parallel construction, depending on what I need to do. And that's the purpose. Harry and Hermione, I have two subjects, I have to use parallel construction. Now, how you apply parallel construction, I'll talk about in a completely separate video because that's a core concept. But the idea to spot this is multiple entities of anything need PC, and I have to look at them as one. When I'm trying to understand a sentence, I will look at the entire parallel construction structure as one entity. So I have a subject, I have a verb, and I have an object. That's it. Within the subject, I have multiple is something that I'll think about later. I'll check parallel construction, which again we'll talk about in a separate video, but that's my crux. This is how I understand a sentence. Same here, there is a subject. Let me just clear this up for a second. I have subject. I know the entire thing is a subject because this and tells me there's parallel construction. So PC only comes in through certain structures. Those structures could be things like and, even things like or, as well as, and plenty others. We'll talk about all of those structures in a separate video. You can find that in any book about parallel construction as a concept as well. I highly recommend Wren and Martin. This is probably the best book on English grammar ever written, according to me, right? But again, with parallel construction, we want to make sure that we look at the entire entity as one. So I have a subject, I have a verb, and I have an object. Continuing, you'll notice that here the subject doesn't have PC, the verb doesn't have PC, but there are two objects. Again, I have two objects, but I will look at them as one. O1 and O2 as one. Same here. Now I can attach multiple parallel constructions within the same sentence. So it doesn't just have to be that multiple subjects do one action and upon one object. Multiple subjects, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, multiple subjects can do an action upon multiple objects. Again, you could have multiple subjects doing multiple actions upon multiple objects. So the sentence can keep getting longer. Harry, Ron, and Hermione learn magic and visit chess and play Quidditch and visit chess. That's also good. So there learn, so if I would just add and play, let's say 2 games, it doesn't have to be anything in particular, X and Y. This is still a sentence, the full stop would obviously not be there. This is still another sentence and I have multiple parallel constructions, right? I have the first parallel construction here, second here, and third here. And I can continue this as long as I want, no limits. Which is why the key is not to know how many I can bring in, the key is to keep spotting and shortening. Keep spotting and shortening. I see one parallel construction, I check if PC is applied correctly, and then I look at that as 1. From there, it's only one entity. So I have parallel construction 1, creates one entity for me. I have parallel construction 2, creates one entity for me. The sentence keeps getting easier to understand. And even if I bring in modifiers here, I just write M1, M2, keeping my subject, verb and object separate. That's how I follow sentences, right? And an example of that, modifiers used in parallel construction is here. We have a subject, we have a verb, we have our object, and we know that this is a modifier because this is just additional information. I will be talking about modifiers in another video where I talk about how you identify them. For now, know that anything that comes after a preposition, to, from, on, over, anything that comes after preposition is a modifier, additional information. That's how I know here. And then I have 2 entities, right? They're learning magic from who? 1 and 2. So there's a PC here within modifiers. And that is the crux of understanding and following a sentence. If we can master this, more often than not, we'll find that at least our understanding would become better. That makes our CR better, that makes our RC better, shows everywhere. Now, just to see the transition, we started off with the simplest, subject, verb, object, Harry learns magic. We then saw that we can bring in parallel construction. So we have a subject which consists of S1, S2, S3, 3 subjects. And then we have our verb and we have our object. We then see how we can have multiple parallel constructions within the same. And finally, we attach it all together. So we have one parallel construction, pardon me for a second. We have one PC that gives us the subject. So we have S1, S2, S3, which would give us S as a whole. Then we have a verb. We have 2 objects, O1 and O2, which gives us the object as a whole. Then we have a modifier first. We have a modifier second. This is incorrect here, pardon me. Then we have another parallel construction. So let's call this parallel construction 3, which is used for modifiers here for M2, for witches and wizards. They are joined by parallel construction. And then I have another modifier here, which is M3. So I've got 1 parallel construction, 2 parallel constructions, and 3 parallel constructions, but I still have only 1 subject, 1 verb, and 1 object. This is how you break a sentence down. As long as you can differentiate between these, the important stuff will always stand out, and you'll notice what is unimportant, making sure that if you ever have to, for example, in critical reasoning, prioritize one factor over the other, you run into that issue very often, right? This also affects the conclusion and this also affects the conclusion. How do I decide which one is better, X or Y? That's where you look at the sentences and you try to figure out what is more important to the sentence, which is an important factor according to the question. The subject would be more important or the object would be more important, usually not the descriptions. And that's how we figure that out, the hierarchy, right? How I would go about this as a very easy plan is spend a couple of days just doing this, just identifying separate entities, right? You'll know whether you're going right or wrong by your understanding of any article. So pick one article about a topic you understand. Start reading it, separate by underlining. Exactly what I've done with the sentence, try doing that to the best of your ability. As you go through the article, you'll notice that everything will start fitting in. Your understanding should remain synchronous as you go through the article. If you start getting confused, it means you're making an error. You use a study partner. With them, try to see how they're understanding, how you're understanding. Wherever you differ, obviously have a debate. And then if you're still confused, talk to someone who's better than you or talk to a tutor, or if there's no one, I'm here. Figure this part out. Till you master it, absolutely master it, don't move on to or don't even think about solving parallel construction or solving critical reasoning or reading comprehension, because you'll never understand why you're going wrong. If this isn't good, then 2 months later, when you're stuck at a 670, you'll be confused as to why am I making mistakes. That's because the foundation isn't correct. This is one of the main reasons that I have seen people not grow with verbal. You'll pick up all the methodologies, but if you don't have the cement that binds it all together, it will be tough to. So work on this. If you have any questions, I'm obviously here. That's all I have for you today. I'll see you the next time when we talk about the core concepts. Thank you.